For your conclusion, now you took the clicker. Come on. All right, I'll go over here. So, thank you so much for staying for the whole talk, for the entire HPAIRx, and thank you. Before I start, would love to thank HPAIRx, the whole team, including Amanda, as well as the first 4 speakers. So, could we please give them another round of applause? All right, and I know we've been here for a long time. It's getting dark outside, so. Before I start, just let's everybody take a deep breath and do woo! All right, cool. Now we're all awake. That's great. So, my name is Yusheng Zhang, and I am from North Carolina. Didn't grow up there, but I've been there for a long time. Moved around the world a lot, and some of you may really relate to this story. And it's truly a privilege to be here today to share basically my thoughts on the future of the world. At least that's my own perspective with you, right? On my life's journey, and I would love to start with a question, right? And don't freak out, but where are you going to be in 10 years? Might be a daunting question, right? But I think it's really important to think about this, to discuss this. So, raise of hands, how many of you are part of the entrepreneurship and technology track this weekend here at HPAIRx? Okay, cool, me too. So, as you may have heard in the past 48 hours, right, the seminars are about AI of the future, empowering the future, ventures of the future. And Moore's law tells us that the chips that are in our phones and in our laptops get more powerful every 2 years. Which means the amount of information and possibilities for the future is also increasing exponentially, right? So 2 years ago, I began on a journey to try to make sense of this through people and their stories. And today, we'll love to share what I learned about 2 types of entrepreneurs and the story they tell about this tectonic shift they tell in the world today, which has distilled down to, through my research, 3 indicators that shed a little bit of light on this democratization of people and ideas. And finally, my one perspective on that question of where we can be in 10 years and where we can be in the future. So, 2 types of entrepreneurs, 3 indicators, 1 perspective, 2, 3, 1, right? And our journey starts in Denmark, in Copenhagen actually, right? So, I met the first type of entrepreneur here. Her name was Jackie. So Jackie is the CEO and founder of Roots Food. And this startup basically takes sustainably farmed and drought-resistant moringa plants from the Philippines, makes them into teas and nutritious bars, and she sells them across the world. And I worked with her to introduce her products to the health-conscious and an expat young professional community in Dubai. And through working with her, I realized that Jackie and a lot of people in Denmark who are entrepreneurs didn't need to be entrepreneurs. They could perfectly find a career somewhere else and work very comfortably for their entire lives. But she chose to be an entrepreneur because she wanted to push the boundaries of how people lived in the Philippines and in Denmark and in Dubai, right? She gained the support of the Danish government, of the Copenhagen government, so that through social welfare and through retirement and through unemployment benefits, if she had failed, the government would be there to have her back, and she could try again. So she is aspiring to a higher level of self-actualization, and this is what I mean by the aspirational entrepreneur. Right. Now let's go to Asia, and put yourselves in the complete opposite shoes of Jackie. Imagine that there is very little social security due to either political or economic instability, and things were just not the same, right? So when we think of entrepreneurship in Asia today, we could focus on giants like Tencent and Alibaba, which is fantastic. But when I arrived in Southeast Asia and listened to the stories of the local entrepreneurs and experts, my perspective changed. So there was a CEO of a clothing manufacturing company in Bangkok, in Thailand, and he got his MBA from Cambridge, and immediately came home afterwards to help out with the family business. And at the time, clothing manufacturing in Bangkok was considered a sunset industry. But through his connections and expertise and access to global markets, he established partnerships with Adidas and Patagonia and helped save this entire industry back in his hometown, right? And then I've also met a couple of guys who founded a thing called the Tribe Group in Singapore. And what they do is they invest in financial technology, fintech, and establish trust in Southeast Asia. So people feel safe putting their money in banks and feel safe getting credit cards. And I asked them, why did you quit, lucrative and successful careers in investment banking, consulting, and working for the government to do something that might not work? Well, and what they said to me is that there is a dire need of financial trust in Southeast Asia, and we have to do this, right? And Gary Liu, the CEO of the South China Morning Post, tells a similar story where, as of last year, as of 2018, 60 million children in China had no access to early childhood education. That is the same amount of people, the total population of everybody in America 17 years and younger, no access to childhood education. So these startups in Shenzhen basically created sunshine classrooms and brought virtual online lessons to these kids in rural China. So the necessity entrepreneur, the second type of entrepreneur, exists to survive or help the community survive, right? But the lines are increasingly blurred between these two groups of people. We can't really just put these startups into buckets based on where they're from, what they do they have money, do they have a nice MBA, do they have great connections, right? So what does this mean for the future? When people are pushing the boundaries of how people live, of human existence, and solving these fundamental needs of human survival in the Appalachian Mountains, in the warehouse meatpacking factories of Copenhagen, and in the streets of Jakarta. What does this mean, and where are we gonna be in 10 years? Right, so that's where the three indicators come in. After coming back from my travels, I began to do research on what I call the reverse brain drain. This is the phenomenon of the US slowly losing market share on some of the world's most talented professors, engineers, lawyers, doctors, entrepreneurs. And they're often going back either to their home countries or to somewhere else in the world. And I began to wonder why this is, right? And the conclusion I came to is that really the pursuit of knowledge and opportunity and innovation is no longer an exclusive privilege of developed Western nations. And this is the tectonic shift that I'm talking about. And this is the democratization of people and their ideas, right? And I propose that this is really a result of improvements in global policy, accumulation of capital, and growth and standard of living. So the three indicators I'm going to talk about are really policy, capital, and growth. So why is policy first? We probably don't think about it every day, waking up, thinking about, yeah, government policy. But it actually touches billions of people across centuries, right? So use one example. 1965, US Congress passed the Hart-Celler Act. Some of you may know it as the Immigration and Nationality Act that created programs such as the H-1B visa. This program allowed people easier entry into the US based on really valuable skills, and they could even potentially live here with their families if everybody could get a visa, right? And 2 years after the passage of this act in 1965, the number of Taiwanese engineers immigrating to the United States rose by 2,500%, right? And as some of you may know, as of 2011, first-generation immigrants and their children founded 40% of Fortune 500 companies, generating billions in revenue and creating millions of jobs. And as of 2016, foreign nationals filed 25%, a quarter of America's foreign patents, right? So a lot of this global contribution to innovation and advancement can be attributed to this 1965 single piece of policy. My dad came to America in 2005 on the H-1B visa, and a year later, my mom and I came as well. We followed him. 10 years later, on August 19th, 2016, we became a US citizen. And I'm able to stand here and share my story with you today, partly because of the 1965 legislation. I'm able to aspire to help people in the future around the world, partly because of this 1965 piece of legislation. But policy doesn't do everything, right? And policy not only regulates things, but it also promotes capital. It promotes growth, and things are changing in the world of capital as well. For example, in the past decade, many countries have passed legislation that allowed entrepreneurs to come to their countries and work and settle down and found their companies there. So take this for example. In 2012, Startup Chile was founded by the Chilean government, where an entrepreneur, if selected to come to Santiago to found their companies, the government would give them $40,000, office space, rent, Spanish lessons for free, access to mentors and investors. And after 6 months, if you decide you don't want to stay in Chile anymore, you can take everything and go, no strings attached. You keep everything, right? And ever since 2012, startups and entrepreneurs from 6 continents have flocked to Santiago, and now they have one of the world's top 10 best entrepreneurship accelerators in the world, right? So you may say, well, these people are moving to Santiago because they have beautiful mountains, and it's a lot of fun to live there. Sure, maybe. But I would argue that they're really moving there for the mountains of cash, right? And so at its core, money can be an enabler for people to move, to switch jobs, to pursue their dreams, and provide for their friends and families. But then you say, well, maybe today, okay, sure, capital and government policy is more attractive in some places in the world than others. So what? What about tomorrow? Where are we going to be in 10 years? That's why we also have to look at this growth indicator, the third and final indicator. And growth can come in many forms. It can mean a lot of things because we're all individual people with unique values, right? So we could look at GDP, we could look at growth and happiness, access to healthcare, access to education. We could look at inclusiveness of the deaf. We could look at LGBT acceptance. We could look at gender and religious and cultural diversity. These are all ways of growth. To give you an example, in San Francisco, right, why do people move there? We could say that immigrants move there for its cultural diversity. We could say that companies settle their headquarters there because they have really smart people. We could say that maybe millennials are going to San Francisco because they have ridiculous farmers markets and you could ride a scooter around the city and that's really cool if that's what you're into, right? But the point is, growth can be whatever is most important to you. So as we wrap up our weekend here at Harvard at HPAIRx, I want to leave you with one of my favorite quotes of all time, right? So where are we going in the future as a generation? Well, Conan O'Brien. Does everybody know who Conan O'Brien is?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. So I love him. And he did an interview here at Harvard a couple of years ago where he said, if you read history over and over again, you're gonna realize that people in charge have no idea what the hell they're doing. And I think that's true, to some extent. So the next time somebody asks you where you're gonna be in 10 years, I really think that it's up to you and me to choose where we wanna go in 10 years. And that we can look out into the world at the places with really welcoming government policy. We could look at the places with ample flow and free-flowing capital and this booming sustainable growth that align with our values. And that's where we can be in 10 years. That's where we can choose to be the driver of this tectonic shift and choose to be the democratizer of people and ideas. My name is Yusheng Zhang. Thank you, HPAIRx.